Hey Yang Gang! You probably saw the debates last night, but I want to do a quick little recap here. As you know, he did amazing. And if you don't know, then continue this video and you will see the clips of him talking during the debates. And also, at the end, put in the post-debate interview, which was really amazing. So check that out too. Also, I wanted to throw this up here real quick. As you can see, Andrew Yang had the least amount of speaking time out of all of the candidates that night. And he still outshone all of them, I believe. And if you can see here, during the first night, Williamson and Hickenlooper also had a small amount of speaking time. I'll say small, but it's still more than 8 minutes. And so he only had a few more seconds of speaking time than they did. So there was still those bottom three in the amount of time talking, but I still feel Andrew Yang won the debate.
I am sticking with Yang. I'm Yang Gang. I believe that this time Andrew Yang will earn the respect of the country. He's the only person talking about the robots and the technology and all these creative solutions. And last time he just kind of sat there and kind of watched the whole thing like he was observing. If he does what he can do, he will have a moment tonight. And I am still Yang Gang.
Okay, some people watching, and I want to make the point though on that, they don't know who he is. Right? If you don't live on social media and you don't,
he's a
his
big deal.
Followers are passionate.
Yes.
All right, and that's the passion that whoever ends up winning this thing needs to have.
And fresh ideas and new ideas. And the thing is, he doesn't have to attack anybody. He's got a whole new set of ideas. I'm telling you, Yang Gang. I'm putting another bet down on Yang.
If you've heard anything about me and my campaign, you've heard that someone is running for president who wants to give every American $1,000 a month. I know this may sound like a gimmick, but this is a deeply American idea, from Thomas Paine to Martin Luther King to today. Let me tell you why we need to do it and how we pay for it. Why do we need to do it? We already automated away millions of manufacturing jobs, and chances are your job could be next. If you don't believe me, just ask an auto worker here in Detroit. How do we pay for it? Raise your hand in the crowd if you've seen stores closing where you live. It is not just you. Amazon is closing 30% of America's stores and malls and paying zero in taxes while doing it. We need to do the opposite of much of what we're doing right now, and the opposite of Donald Trump is an Asian man who likes math. So let me share the math. $1,000 a month for every adult would be $461 million every month right here in Detroit alone. The automation of our jobs is a central challenge facing us today. It is why Donald Trump is our president, and any politician not addressing it is failing the American people.
Mr. Yang, I want to bring you in. You support a Medicare for all system. How do you respond to Governor Inslee?
Well, I just want to share a story. When I told my wife I was running for president, you know the first question she asked me? What are we going to do about our health care? That's a true story, and it's not just us. Democrats are talking about healthcare in the wrong way. As someone who's run a business, I can tell you flat out our current healthcare system makes it harder to hire. It makes it harder to treat people well and give them benefits and treat them as full-time employees. It makes it harder to switch jobs, as Senator Harris just said, and it's certainly a lot harder to start a business. If we say, look, we're going to get healthcare off the backs of businesses and families, then watch American entrepreneurship recover and bloom. That's the argument we should be making to the American people.
Thank you, Mr. Yang. Mayor de Blasio.
I'm the son of immigrants myself. My father immigrated here as a graduate student and generated over 65 US patents for GE and IBM. I think that's a pretty good deal for the United States. That's the immigration story we need to be telling. We can't always be focusing on some of the distressed stories. And if you go to a factory here in Michigan, you will not find wall-to-wall immigrants. You will find wall-to-wall robots and machines. Immigrants are being scapegoated for issues they have nothing to do with in our economy.
Thank you, Mr. Yang. Mr. Yang, why are you the best candidate to heal the racial divide in America? Your response.
I spent 7 years running a nonprofit that helped create thousands of jobs, including hundreds right here in Detroit, as well as Baltimore, Cleveland, New Orleans. And I saw that the racial disparities are much, much worse than I'd ever imagined. They're even worse still. A study just came out that projected the average African-American median net worth will be zero by 2053. So you have to ask yourself, how is that possible? It's possible because we're in the midst of the greatest economic transformation in our history. Artificial intelligence is coming. It's going to displace hundreds of thousands of call center workers. Truck drivers, the most common job in 29 states, including this one. And you know who suffers most in a natural disaster? It's people of color, people who have lower levels of capital and education and resources. So what are we going to do about it? We should just go back to the writings of Martin Luther King, who in 1967, his book Chaos or Community, said we need a guaranteed minimum income in the United States of America. That is the most effective way for us to address racial inequality in a genuine way and give every American a chance in the 21st century economy.
Mr. Yang, thank you very much.
In poll after poll, Democratic voters saying that having a nominee who can beat President Trump is more important to them than having a nominee who agrees with them on major issues. And right now, according to polls, they say the candidate who has the best chance of doing that, of beating President Trump, is Vice President Biden. Why are they wrong?
Well, I'm building a coalition of disaffected Trump voters, independents, libertarians, and conservatives, as well as Democrats and progressives. I believe I'm the candidate best suited to beat Donald Trump. And as for how to win in Michigan and Ohio and Pennsylvania, the problem is that so many people feel like the economy has left them behind. What we have to do is we have to say, look, there's record high GDP and stock market prices. You know what else are at record highs? Suicides, drug overdoses, depression, anxiety. It's gotten so bad that American life expectancy has declined for the last 3 years. And I like to talk about my wife who's at home with our 2 boys right now, one of whom is autistic. What does her work count at in today's economy? 0, and we know that's the opposite of the truth. We know that her work is among the most challenging and vital.
Mr. Yang, women on average earn 80 cents, about 80 cents for every dollar earned by men. Senator Harris wants to fine companies that don't close their gender pay gaps. As an entrepreneur, do you think a stiff fine will change how companies pay their female employees?
I have seen firsthand the inequities in the business world where women are concerned, particularly in startups and entrepreneurship. We have to do more at every step. And if you're a woman entrepreneur, the obstacles start not just at home, but then when you seek a mentor or an investor, often they don't look like you, and they might not think your idea is the right one. In order to give women a leg up, what we have to do is we have to think about women in every situation, including the ones who are in exploitative and abusive jobs and relationships around the country. I'm talking about the waitress who's getting harassed by her boss at the diner, who might have a business idea, but right now is stuck where she is. What we have to do is we have to give women the economic freedom to be able to improve their own situations and start businesses. And the best way to do this is by putting a dividend of $1,000 a month into their hands. It would be a game changer for women around the country because we know that women do more of the unrecognized and uncompensated work in our society. It will not change unless we change it. And I say that's just what we do. You know what the talking heads couldn't stop talking about after the last debate? It's not the fact that I'm somehow number 4 on this stage in national polling. It was the fact that I wasn't wearing a tie. Instead of talking about automation in our future, including the fact that we automated away 4 million manufacturing jobs, hundreds of thousands right here in Michigan, we're up here with makeup on our faces and our rehearsed attack lines, playing roles in this reality TV show. It's one reason why we elected a reality TV star as our president. We need to be laser focused on solving the real challenges of today, like the fact that the most common jobs in America may not exist in a decade, or that most Americans cannot pay their bills. My flagship proposal, the Freedom Dividend, would put $1,000 a month into the hands of every American adult, be a game changer for millions of American families. If you care more about your family and your kids than my neckwear, enter your zip code at yang2020.com and see what $1,000 a month would mean to your community. I have done the math. It's not left. It's not right. It's forward. And that is how we're going to beat Donald Trump in 2020.
Senator Booker.
Yes, exactly. That was the best closing statement ever.
Hey, Yang Gang, it's Andrew here at the debate stage. As you can see, what a fantastic night. I think the Yang Gang is going to grow a ton. If you think so too, please make a donation tonight at yang2020.com and let's show big numbers. Let's show the world that we're going to go all the way. Thank you, Yang Gang. I love you guys. You're the best. Wouldn't be here without you.
They do well, and I must say that Andrew Yang.
Yes.
Yeah, there you go.
Andrew
I
Yang,
agree.
He did his thing. He did his thing.
I agree.
Another big night here in Detroit. Joining us, another participant who made a big impact on the stage. Andrew Yang is with us. Thanks so much for being with us.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
How did you feel it went tonight?
I felt it went great. It's great to be back here in Detroit. I've spent the last 9 years here as part of Venture for America, and so it feels like a very familiar home for me.
And just in terms of, I feel like in the first debate, you didn't get a lot of time. I feel like you got more time, and you certainly made a strong impression, I think, on a lot of people in the room, and I assume in the viewing audience at home. There was the line you started at. Yeah, at one point you called yourself the opposite of Donald Trump, an Asian man who likes math.
Yeah, and math is an acronym. It stands for Make America Think Harder. We have to start actually thinking about the real problems and not lapsing into the fairy tales that unfortunately we're being told by the current president.
Well, I think there's a lot of voices on a stage. I think yours is such an important voice because I think you're raising issues that nobody else is talking about, and you're looking at it from a perspective that nobody else is really looking at. I mean, I feel like at times you're taking a kind of a bird's eye view and saying, wait a minute, we're all just on this stage and wearing makeup and talking points and missing out on all these huge things which are about to hit us in the head.
Yeah, and spending 7 years in places like Detroit and Cleveland and St. Louis, I saw the ground zero of what's happened to so many of these communities in the aftermath of the automation of these manufacturing jobs. And the retraining programs that were put in place were largely ineffective. When I dug into the numbers, almost half of the manufacturing workers here in Michigan that lost their jobs to automation left the workforce. And then of that group, about half filed for disability. And then you saw surges in suicides and drug overdoses and social ills.
And why are the programs so ineffective, the retraining programs?
The truth is that human beings are not infinitely malleable or adaptable. I mean, I was at a truck stop in Iowa the other week, and if you tried to sell retraining to that group of truckers, they'd be more likely to punch you in the face than eagerly sign up. Like human beings are just not widgets.
Right.
And if you think about the people you know, the people in your life, maybe your parents, and you were to say, hey, like reinvent yourself, it's a very, very tall order for many.
I would not be able to reinvent. I have no actual skill, so I could not be retrained to do anything other than this. Speaking of which, I got to take a quick break. But see, this is not a skill that's applicable in any other way. I can throw it a break. We'll talk more with Andrew Yang in just a second, live from Detroit. We are coming up on the top of the hour to 1 a.m. here in Detroit. Back with me, Andrew Yang. I want to play a key moment of Mr. Yang from the debate tonight.
Raise your hand in the crowd if you've seen stores closing where you live. It is not just you. Amazon is closing 30% of America's stores and malls and paying zero in taxes while doing it. We need to do the opposite of much of what we're doing right now, and the opposite of Donald Trump is an Asian man who likes math.
You said we need to do the opposite of what we are doing right now. In what way? What do you mean?
So Donald Trump came and said, look, there are all these problems in our communities, and so what we need to do is we need to turn the clock back. We need to bring the old jobs back. We need to build a wall. And I'm saying we need to do the opposite of all of these things. We need to turn the clock forward. We need to evolve in the way we see work and value in our society. And we need to stop trying to bring the old jobs back. We have to start putting more value into Americans' hands so that we can start creating the jobs of the future.
I thought it was so interesting. You said, and I want to make sure I don't get it wrong, about changing the measurements of the 21st century economy. What you were talking about, sort of, how do we treat our kids, what family members who are working inside the home, the value that we place on that, what would that do? I mean, what would be the purpose of that, other than it makes sense and it's, rational as a human being, as an economic thing, why is that important?
It's crucial. Even the person who invented GDP 100 years ago, Simon Kuznets, said three things. He said, one, there's a terrible measurement for national well-being and we should never use it as that. He also said we should include parenthood and motherhood because they're so important. And the third thing he said was that we shouldn't include military defense spending in the calculation because it adds no economic value. So, of course, we've ignored all three of those things, and now we're writing GDP off a cliff. GDP's at record highs while our life expectancy is going down. And so if you see that this divergence is happening, then you have to line up your measurements so that it actually reflects how we are doing.
But you're almost, I mean, like, in Bhutan, they have a national happiness index. Is that what you're kind of talking about?
So the goal is to build a scorecard, what I call the American Scorecard, and GDP is still one element of it. But you also have our health and life expectancy, our mental health and freedom from substance abuse, our environmental quality, childhood success measurements. And then if someone decides to, let's say, step away from the workforce and nurture their child, that's not an economic sacrifice. That's actually an investment in our future. The same thing if there's a teacher who's doing great work in the classroom, instead of them saying you're a cost, say actually the value they're creating is massive because they might help 30 kids that year develop and become stronger. So if you change your measurements, you actually can reorganize our economy. And we have to do that because artificial intelligence coming, that's going to be very, very tough to compete with on the numbers.
I was just talking to the Gateses, and one of the things they stress is that the best investment you can possibly make is investing in children and their education, and just for dollar, it is the best investment anybody can make.
Yeah, and this is something I didn't get to say on the debate stage, but 2/3 of our kids' academic performance is determined by outside of school factors. So that's parental time with the child at home, that's stress levels in the house, that's the type of neighborhood. And educators know this. Educators know that they can control about 1/3 of kids' academic performance, and 2/3 is determined outside of school. So if we want to get serious about giving our kids a chance to learn, we would put resources directly into the family's hands and into the homes to decrease the stress levels, get the number of words read to the kid when they're young up, and that would give our kids an actual chance to learn and our teachers an actual chance to educate.
Is that why you're talking about giving $1,000? And explain why giving $1,000.
Cash to every American. Because if you look at it, we spend by international standards a pretty good amount of money in our schools, and yet we don't see the performance improvements that we want to see. And the reason for that is that we're channeling resources into something that controls 35% of the kids' educational outcomes, and then we're ignoring the 65%, which is, again, parental time, number of words read to the child. Like, you have to get resources into the family to actually change the kids' outcomes in a meaningful way in many, many cases.
So, but I think all you're saying is really interesting. If you are president, what does that actually look like? I mean, what then are you actually
going to do?
Yeah.
All right, so here we go. The great thing is it's going to be very straightforward for me to go down the street to the Bureau of Economic Analysis and say, hey, GDP, very old and archaic, hasn't been updated in decades. So we're going to update it to the American Scorecard that includes these other measurements that are incredibly important to us, make a lot of sense to the American people, put more money in the hands of families.
But if there's this American Scorecard where how you treat your kids and what time you spend with your kids and the educational outcomes of them, how does that impact anybody's life?
Behavior in life.
As a society writ large.
Well, so the first thing is at the State of the Union every year, I would actually report on how we're doing by the real measurements. I'd be the first president to use a PowerPoint deck and say, look, here are the actual measurements for how our kids are doing, how our environment is developing, how our mental health is. And then you can actually invest and try and make resources. The trick, Anderson, is to try to tie corporate incentives to these measurements. So that right now, if you are a big company and you decide to do something positive in the community, it's just PR. And then you say, look at this great stuff I did. But if you can then demonstrate, it's like, hey, I made these kids demonstrably stronger, then they can actually get a tax credit for that. They can get economic credit for that. That's the only way we're going to align the incentives to our own well-being. Because again, right now, GDP and capital efficiency are heading in one direction, and our health and well-being are heading in another.
I feel like I understand only about a quarter of what you're saying, but I find that quarter incredibly interesting.
Oh, good.
So I'm just acknowledging my own stupidity and your intelligence. I know others have a question as well.
No, well, I'm interested in the automation issue because I think there are huge things going on, and you've said so, that really almost don't get discussed in this debate. We're discussing an economy that's vanished, and, we heard a lot of discussion about trade tonight. How much is employment at risk to trade policies as compared to or with automation and the threats that automation poses to jobs that exist today?
When I ran the numbers here in Michigan and in the industrial Midwest, about 80% of the job loss was due to automation and machines, and 20% was due to trade and globalization. So automation is the bigger threat. And some of the examples I use that Americans can understand, 30% of our stores and malls are closing, and it's the most common job in the economy to be a cashier or retail worker. The average retail cashier is a 39-year-old woman making between $9 and $10 an hour. So you don't think of that as an automation thing, and that it's not like a robot came into the store and started, taking orders. But if you go to the Amazon fulfillment center that is closing all these stores and malls, it's wall-to-wall machines and robots.
Can I ask a question? So the automation issue, super important. It is coming. It's not slowing down. So the question is, for the big tech, what are the sort of policy guardrails that should be put around this? I mean, you're not going to be a Luddite. You're not going to stop it.
No.
So how do you protect people? Or how do you allow them to use the technology in order to enhance themselves if training and reskilling themselves is not necessarily the answer?
There are a number of prominent technologists who've supported my campaign and embraced it. And certainly one big principle is that we all need to share in the gains. So that if you have Amazon, this trillion-dollar tech company, you have to give a tiny slice of every Amazon sale, and ideally every Facebook ad, every Google search, every Uber truck mile, and put it in our hands and help us build these economies that work in our communities.
Meaning more than universal basic income, separate from that, or is that what you're talking about?
Oh, I'm talking about universal basic income, the Freedom Dividend primarily, but there are other ways too. The other big issue to me that Americans can understand very directly is that our teenagers, particularly our teenage girls, are becoming very depressed and anxious because of smartphone use and social media use. And you don't have to look any further than if you go to Silicon Valley, they have a very strict no screens rule in those households, and they know the technology better than anyone.
Yeah, a lot of these tech people do not allow their children to use it, or even they just limit it for a lot.
They use the technology to limit it. You can have 2 hours, it's programmed in.
So we need to try and get our arms around that technology application so that our kids aren't just getting addicted to these slot machines.
Let me just say a couple things. One is just, I cannot tell you how happy I am that you're in this race. No, I'm serious. And the reason for that
has been talking about you.
The reason for that is two things, and they're important things. One is, in a crisis, if you get the right answer to the wrong question, you still die. We don't ask the right question, so we spend all this time trying to get the right answer, sometimes to the wrong question. I think when you point out, and I say this to the Black Lives Matter folks all the time, I'm concerned about the racists. I'm much more concerned about the robots. The robots are going to do much more damage to your community than the racists on any given Sunday, and we're not focused on it. So you bringing this out into the mainstream and making it part of the conversation is so important. I appreciate you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate you.
We got to wrap it up. Mr. Young, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
So as you can see, great job in the debates by Andrew Yang. And also, this interview was excellent. It gave him more time to explain what he was talking about and to show himself to the American people. He did an excellent job, and they asked the right questions. Although this video is all about Andrew Yang, I wanted to throw this in here because I thought it was great. Trending in the #1 spot last night and this morning was Kamala Harris destroyed. And it was Tulsi who totally destroyed her.
Says she's proud of her record as a prosecutor and that she'll be a prosecutor president, but I'm deeply concerned about this record. There are too many examples to cite, but she put over 1,500 people in jail for marijuana violations and then laughed about it when she was asked if she ever smoked marijuana. She blocked evidence that would have freed an innocent man from death row until the courts forced her to do so. She kept people in prison beyond their sentences to use them as cheap labor for the state of California. And she fought to keep cash bail system in place that impacts poor people in the worst kind of way. When you are in a position to make a difference and an impact in these people's lives, you did not. And worse yet, in the case of those who are on death row, innocent people, you actually blocked evidence from being revealed that would have freed them until you were forced to do so. There is no excuse for that. And the people who suffered under your reign as prosecutor, you owe them an apology.
I also wanted to throw this short clip in here because I thought it was absolutely hilarious. What he was supposed to say, text to this number, but he left that out, and the Twitter firestorm after that was hilarious. So if you want to see some of those tweets, just type in what he says into Twitter. Also, if you type that in as a web address with .com on the end, that is also hilarious.
If you agree with me Go to Joe 30330 and help me in this fight.
Yummy, 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 yummy.